Let's get started. My name is Eve Tamme, and I'm the chair of Zero Emissions Platform. And welcome to this event that we are organizing together with the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. The event is titled Decarbonizing with Carbon Capture and Storage, a pathway to green transformation and industrial competitiveness. So to get started, a few words about Zero Emissions Platform. So this is a platform that serves to be an advisor to the European Union on the deployment of carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and utilization technologies. We are working to scale these technologies as climate technologies to help to achieve the climate targets in Europe. These technologies, among many others, are literally the cornerstones of achieving climate neutrality in the European Union. The organization itself is already 20 years old. We have, in the past, been most focusing on research and innovation. But given how the whole field of carbon capture and storage has changed in Europe, the progress in the upcoming projects, the progress in the policy landscape, in the last 5 years or so, we are now much more focusing on the policy advocacy work, making sure that we are creating the conditions, we are putting forward the right policy proposals to create the right conditions to scale these technologies in a safe and sustainable way. If we think about the role of CCS in Europe, it's mostly focused around industrial decarbonization. We're talking about the cement industry, the steel industry, the chemicals industry, and part of that is also the important aspect of safeguarding jobs and creating new jobs. The technologies, in general, are actually very versatile because by using carbon capture and storage, we can reduce emissions, but at the same time, we can also remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So it serves as emission reduction set of technologies, but also as carbon removal technologies when applied through direct air capture with carbon storage or with bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. The great thing is that there is a major momentum for carbon capture and storage in Europe these days. The project pipeline is already around 70 projects in Europe. We have never seen these numbers before, so that's a huge development. Another great thing is that these projects are not all around the North Sea, where the interest got started and where we have the best storage reserves. Instead, we are seeing the projects popping up in different parts of Europe, and that's a great development. We're seeing huge developments in the policy landscape. We have never had policy proposals before like we have today. For example, the Net Zero Industry Act, which is in essence a response to the US IRA. And in the Net Zero Industry Act proposal, we see a suggestion to establish a specific 50 million tons by 2030 carbon storage targets, which could be instrumental in scaling this industry in Europe. Also putting a very specific role on the oil and gas industries in making all of that possible, making the storage possible. So there is just a complete change from some years ago when the discussions were still rather around whether we need these technologies. Now it's really about getting into the specific, how exactly are we going to scale these technologies, what needs to happen. Another milestone that we will see in the coming month is the European Industrial Carbon Management Strategy. So the European Commission will publish it in November. And this is now, we are at least hoping, setting the vision for the first time for the whole European Union on how exactly we are going to go about deploying these technologies, how are we going to go about harmonizing what needs to be harmonized, because we talk about capturing CO2, but also transporting it oftentimes across borders and then storing it in storage sites. So there is so much that is exciting that is happening in this space. And we have a great panel to unpack all these developments and more in front of you. We have Guloren Turan from the Global CCS Institute. So that's also the organization with whom together we are organizing this event. We have Aniceto Sagarosa from Office Men, so bringing us the Spanish perspective. We have Eva Pernod from Clean Air Task Force, bringing in the perspective of the environmental NGO, and Stein Santen from EBN, but who's also working with us with a zero emissions platform in establishing a new projects network that would help scale these technologies in Europe. So I will stop here with my opening remarks, and I will move over and start the part of the moderation, which will also be done by me. And I will first give the floor to Guloren to elaborate on what exactly is happening more specifically in Europe with CCS, and any other insights you want to share in the opening context. Over to you, Guloren.
Take that in case. Thanks very much, Eve. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here in Malaga for the EU Industry Days, and thanks, Eve, for the opening remarks. My name is Guloren Turan with the Global CCS Institute. For those of you that are not familiar with the Institute, we are an international think tank that aims to accelerate the deployment of carbon management technologies, CCS, and particularly CDR, in order to meet our climate targets. We're present in 7 countries. In setting the scene for my colleagues, for my panelists coming after me, I'll structure my remarks in 3 parts. I'll first talk a little bit about the state of CCS globally, then I'll talk about the status of CCS in Europe, and finally I'll try to give some thoughts about where to go from here. I'll start by saying that carbon capture and storage is a proven, versatile, and safe climate technology that is a necessary part of our climate toolkit in order to reduce our emissions, remove our emissions, and get to net zero. I said CCS is proven. Indeed, it has been in operation since the 1970s. It's been in operation for the past 50 years. The first facility started operations in the US in the early 1970s. And in Europe, in Norway, the Snøhvit facility has started up in 1996. In fact, so far today, up to now, more than 20 million tons has been captured and stored only in Norway alone. Currently, there are 37 facilities, commercial facilities in operation around the world with a capacity to capture and store around 50 million tons of CO2 per year. This is equivalent to taking 10 million cars off the road in a year. And there are more than 200 facilities around the world in various different stages of development. Eva mentioned CCS is a versatile technology. I said it's a versatile technology. This is because CCS can help meet our climate targets in a number of ways. First and foremost, it can help us achieve deep decarbonization in hard-to-abate industries, which is the topic of these 2 days here. In industries like cement, steel, chemicals, the products that are produced are cornerstones of our current society, our ways of life, yet we cannot live with the emissions that are produced through these industries. So, for example, the cement industry accounts for around 8% of global emissions. But even if we were to use completely renewable and zero-carbon electricity to produce cement, it's not the power source, but it's rather the process emissions that account for around 2/3 of the emissions from cement production. And it's the calcination of limestone, and CCS is the only available technology that is able to address these process emissions today. Additionally, CCS can help produce low-carbon hydrogen, which can then be used to further decarbonize industry. Renewables are the major source and the most cost-competitive source of electricity in a lot of locations, but plants power plants coupled with CCS can also provide flexible electricity for the times when wind, for example, does not blow. And last but not least, carbon capture, either from the direct air, through the direct air capture and storage, or when it's combined with biomass or bioenergy, can lead to carbon dioxide removal, thereby addressing those really hard to abate, sort of balancing those really hard to abate remaining emissions, or potentially addressing historic emissions in the atmosphere. It's this versatility of CCS that it can help with both the flow of emissions, but also with that the stock of emissions is what it makes such a unique climate tool in our toolkit. Finally, it's important to remember that CCS is a safe technology. CO2 as a gas, it does not combust. And when we talk about storage, we're talking about storage in underground formations that are at least a kilometer, if not more, underground, sometimes in depleted oil and gas reservoirs, which actually held hydrocarbons for thousands of years. So as proven by science and, for example, as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change agrees, in carefully selected sites, CO2 storage is effectively safe and permanent. So the status in Europe, I just use a map here. As Eva again said, looking at Europe, CCS is a fundamental part of our net zero journey. Through the adoption of the EU Green Deal, the climate law, and the subsequent proposals to get to net zero emissions, and our climates for 2030 made CCS a very important component of EU's decarbonization efforts. Just as a reminder, the Commission, and I know Chris Davies is here, the Commission already provides a regulatory framework for transport and storage of CO2 through the 2009 directive on the geological storage of carbon dioxide. So it's not something new in the EU here. But momentum for CCS continues to build in Europe, with the Commission initiating a number of new legislative proposals in the recent months, and funding CCS projects through the Innovation Fund and in Connecting Europe facility. In the first 3 calls of the Innovation Fund, more than 20 projects with either a CCS or CCU component have been selected, which is really relevant. In her latest State of the Union address, President von der Leyen noted that EU will continue to support the industry as it relates to green transition, and the Net Zero Industry Act will be a key component in doing so. In fact, she wrote to the incoming Commissioner Hoekstra, asking him to lean more forward in terms of carbon management strategies. The EU's newly introduced Net Zero Industry Act has broad measures, but as we've discussed before, it has an ambitious storage target of developing a sort of capacity to store 50 million tons of CO2 by 2030. And importantly, the Act also seeks to shorten regulatory permitting timelines that might be a barrier to achieving our climate ambitions, particularly 2030 climate ambitions. In addition to the Innovation Fund, there are individual national support and subsidy programs, notably in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in Norway, and in EU. When we look at EU ETS, as you all know, the ETS price surpassed 100 euros a ton earlier this year, and it's continuing to contribute to an improved business case for CCS. And there are some countries like France and Germany which are looking for what's called contracts for difference in order to provide a more stable carbon price for decarbonization projects. North Sea does continue to be continue to dominate as the preferred CO2 storage sites in Europe because of the history there, but there are other options also emerging. For example, in Bulgaria, in Greece, in Croatia, in Italy. So there are onshore and offshore storage facilities in Black Sea, in the Adriatic Sea are being targeted, as well as potentially onshore storage in Denmark, in Poland, and Croatia. So really exciting momentum. Having said this, And as Eva said, there are more than 70 facilities, in fact, in various stages of development in Europe. But operational capacity, storage capacity that is either operating or under construction is less than 5 million tons per year at the moment. And from 5 million tons, the target is 50 million tons by 2030. The Commission's report says we need to get to 300 million tons by 2040 and say around 400 to 500 million tons by 2050. So a major scaling up is going to be needed. Time is not working in our favor. In the OECD and in Europe, of course, projects historically have taken around 7-8 years to be completed from start to finish. And there are some elements in the Net Zero Industry Act that is aiming to address this problem, which we will look into. We need a coherent CCUS strategy in Europe, which the Commission, with input from the industry and other stakeholders, has been working on. And we're looking forward to seeing it before the CCS Forum in Denmark, which will happen in November this year. And my final point is, last but not least, we also need the member states to progress their own CCS strategies, their own plans and investments. France and Germany are working on their CCS strategies. Would love to see Spain lean more forward again in this space. And I think Denmark is a great case study of what can be achieved if the government puts its mind to it and there's strong public-private partnerships. Just earlier this year, the first injection started, CO2 injection started in Denmark, probably after 2 to 3 years of just giving the green light. So yes, it is possible to do. It's just we have to act together and act together quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Guloren. And we are now moving on to hear from Aniceto Zagarosa from Officemen on how CCS can support the decarbonization of the cement sector and the challenges and enablers of its deployments.
Right.
Aniceto, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eve. Well, on behalf of the Spanish Cement Association, means Officemen, I want to thank the invitation to participate in these very interesting panels. Well, our sector, I think we have the presentations.
Yeah, apologies. I think,
No.
is that Ever's presentation? Can we...
Okay, thank you. Well, I will make some comments and very short explanations about our strategy, our roadmap to decarbonize the sector in our country. This philosophy is exactly the same that we had developed at European level inside Semburo, and we use the 5-6 approach. The 5-6 approach means that we have no simple solutions to achieve neutrality, and we need to act in every level we have. The first one is clinker, and clinker is the most related actions in relation with CCS. We also need to react in cement level, also to have actions in relation with concrete, to take in consideration constructions, at the very end, decarbonation or recarbonation, depending we are talking about cement or concrete. Very short comments about the strategy. We are focused on clinker footprint reductions. 2/3 of the CO2 footprint are related to clinker production. This means this is our main focus. Then we want to resolve the problem of clinker by improving efficiency. This is a tradition, this is something. Developing low carbon cements, clinkers. We have some alternative to produce new low carbon cement clinkers. The use of hydrogen, this is something that we have just some expertise. And this is most fundamental, the use of carbon capture, use and storage. We'll see later, this is the most important part of the reductions. In relation with cement, we can use different components, meaning that we introduce no constitutions, no new additions, and this is important. We are reducing the clinker cement ratio. This is one of the goals we have. And in concrete, we want to have a better use of concrete. And then it means that we can do more with less. More concrete with less cement. And in construction we have two different aspects. One thing is concrete constructions help to reduce CO2 footprint because it means we need net energy to accommodate buildings. But at the same time, we can improve the constructions with concrete if we have a better design. For instance, we have one sample in Madrid where the same building have saved 43% of concrete inside, and it's the same building. The only way then we need to redefine pillar, structure, everything. Because as you know, concrete is so cheap that normally we introduce much than we need. Then we have some kind of refitting of the process, then we can save some CO2. And the fifth is recarbonation or carbonation of concrete. This is a natural phenomenon. But we want to manage this natural phenomenon. We can do at the very end of the life of the building. It means that we can expose the aggregate, the recycled aggregate, and then this process of recarbonation is natural. We will see this carbon recarbonation is a carbon removal with the new consideration of the Commission more than a weight. It means that this recarbonation we need to consider in a different way. Then what is the this is. Okay, if we translate into kilograms, what is the form, the stress we need to introduce in the industry, we will see that more or less 40% of the solution of the problem will be related to CCUS. Because the other can help us to reduce 60%, but with the 40%, we need clear solutions. It means that without CCUS, it will be impossible for the time being for the industry to reach neutrality. This is impossible. And this is very important to understand for the policymakers. We need it. If they want to have cement, and this is clear, it's a product that is absolutely fundamental for our society, then we need to introduce CCUS. But what kind of challenges and enablers we need to have a clear CCUS strategy in our country? The first one is we need a roadmap. I was talking about, the new publications in Germany and France about a national strategy. We use the government to have a national strategy about CCUS. This is the first one. The second one is to work harder with social acceptance of the use of this technology, because probably there are a lot of misunderstandings that we need to clarify. The third one is to have a public-private approach to the process. It's not only the problem of the company, it's not only the problem of the administration. We need to have a clear and strong partnership. The fourth for us is to have a clear definition that open access to facilities, all the CO2 infrastructure. When you consider that, for instance, our plants, we have plants in a very isolated places, try to find an economical approach will be very difficult. We need to have a global, it means that we need, the public actions in this field. Other is to find new financing mechanisms. This is very expensive. Probably we need to consider the impact of the society. Then we need to find new contract for difference. We need to think how to finance in a different way. Something absolute fundamental for us is to have a CBAM fully operational. It is clear that this incredible transformation will have a huge impact in the cost structure of the company. Probably the products will be much more expensive than today, and without a CBAM operating correctly, we will see a carbon leakage process in a very short time. Then we need a CBAM, a nice CBAM. Well, we also need enough green energy, because we multiply by 2 or 3 our consumptions. It is clear that we need green energy. This is a problem for the grid. It means all the system will be stressed, and we need to be sure. Well, at the end of the day, we are going to produce new cement. And one of the barriers we have with new cements is the standardization process. You say that to have a project running could spend 7 years. To have a new standard on cement, the product, 10 years. Then it means that we will see we have different paths. We need to rethink our standardization process. So this is a must for the union. We need to introduce the new products in the public procurement process at date, and we need to review. And the last one is we need new skills, because probably the employees we are going to have in our plants will be absolutely different. And this is basically the challenges and enablers we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aniceto, and we're moving on to Everard Pernau from the Clean Air Task Force, and he will share insights on the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure that is enabling the industrial decarbonization in Europe. Everard.
Thank you very much. Oh, this is on? It's on, is it? It's on. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to talk about the 3 favorite things in the world for me, which are pore space, projects, and policy. So my name is Everard Pernau. Apologies, it's a very weird Irish name. I work for Clean Air Task Force, which is an international climate NGO, and I'm here to talk about CO2 infrastructure in Europe. And firstly, thank you very much to the Zero Emissions Platform and to the Global CCS Institute for inviting me onto this panel, and thank you also for hosting an excellent event in Malaga. It's my first time in the sunny part of Spain. I've only been in the northern parts. So to kick things off, I would like to talk about this. Now, I love maps. That's my 4th favorite thing, actually. And Galoran had an excellent map earlier, which looked at projects as they're developing in Europe. And so at Clean Air Task Force, we have been looking at how the CCS industry in Europe is growing at the moment. And we commissioned a study, which we've been working on for a number of months, and it was published in July. Feel free to check out our website. It's called Unlocking Europe's CO2 Storage Potential. And what we did was basically we looked at where are the sources of emissions in Europe if we're looking at hard-to-abate industries. So Aniceto's members in Spain, for example, the cement industry. We're looking at other industrial facilities like fertilizer manufacturing, and where the CO2 sinks. So where can we put the CO2 and where can we capture the CO2? And how do we map up those things, match those things together? And what we did was first we looked at how many countries in Europe have the potential to even store CO2 in the first place. And the good news is, on the pore space front, it's quite good. Most member states in the EU have reasonably good potential to store CO2. We see a lot of activity in the North Sea, and for various reasons, they have quite a historically well-developed oil and gas industry. They know their geology quite well. Other parts of Europe, not so much, but there's still quite a good potential to store CO2 in most places. Some member states, unfortunately, are in a bit of a difficult situation, maybe like Estonia and Finland. Their geology is not so great. So they're going to have to figure out a way, if they want to keep their industries, like cement production, for example, either those cement plants are going to have to move away, or they're going to have to find a way to capture the CO2 and then to transport it. Now, the transport of CO2 is a very interesting thing, because there's basically two ways you can transport lots of volumes of CO2. You can transport CO2 on rail and truck. Large volumes get really expensive and very tricky. You need a lot of rail cars and trucks to do that. But generally, we're talking about ships and we're talking about pipelines. And when we talk about how these sort of flows are going to work, so if we look at the left side, so that's 1A of this diagram, we can kind of see where this is actually, by 2035, how things are probably going to map out if we keep going the way we're going right now. So we're looking at very large storage sites in the North Sea. We've got some, is this a clicker? We've got some storage sites in Italy. There's a small one in southern France, which I'm going to talk about actually in the next slide. We've also got some innovation fund projects like in Bulgaria, right? But there's not a lot of storage sites operating in Europe. And you can see there's big, long arrows, right? So that's basically where CO2 is being shipped from export terminals. You can see from Spain, they haven't got any storage sites operating there in 2035. Even Portugal sending its CO2 all the way to the North Sea. And as you can imagine, sending CO2 over long distances can get quite expensive. And so when we look at the right side of the diagram, that kind of shows where we've developed a bit more domestic storage sites. So more member states have decided to get their act together. They've got a storage site or two operating. And the short answer to the difference between both of these is that on the right side, that's about 3 times less in terms of overall costs when we're talking about carbon capture and storage. So that's both OpEx and CapEx. So by 2050, when we ramp things up to what the European Commission, we look at the IEA, we look at the IPCC scenarios, they all say we're going to need about 500 million tons per annum of CO2 is going to need to be stored in Europe. And right now in the EU, we're not really doing any of that. None of it's operational. So when we're thinking about how we're going to plan this industry and where we're going to link this infrastructure and how we can map our sources to our sinks, we need to start thinking about developing domestic storage resources. And I like to think of it as a really much more, not so much of it is definitely a climate thing. It's very much focused on reducing, and then we're also going to need those storage sites to remove emissions from the atmosphere as well, by the way. But also it's an economic resource. If you've got a country like Denmark, for example, who's now really pushing ahead and developing a storage industry of its own, where they're going to charge hefty fees to import CO2 from other countries at the expense, let's say, of the German taxpayer because they don't want to store CO2 in Germany, well then that means that Denmark's going to profit off the backs of other member states. So some member states are going to be in better situations than others, right? In North Sea, they've got a lot of potential to store CO2, lots of volumes, lots of infrastructure, they're committed to it. Other countries, maybe they won't be able to store all of their CO2, but they can retain some of the industry there and store the CO2 with reduced costs as much as possible. So that's one side of things. The next side is how member states can act on this. So I'm in Spain. There's not a lot of activity happening on CCS here as there are in other parts of Europe, unfortunately. But there are 2 real projects that I think are standing out as what I think are really good, important candidates. And they both share similar characteristics in the sense that they both are trying to operate as a hub. So in the past, in Europe, we've kind of looked at how we can map one large source, right? So 10, 15 years ago, we tried this with coal power. We took one big coal plant and one storage site and just matched them together. Very risky, right? If you're relying on one single source of CO2 to justify investment decisions into pipelines and infrastructure, an easier way to do it is actually thinking of it like a hub. So actually in Europe's port areas, and usually along the coast, we have a lot of these industrial clusters. And in the Netherlands, for example, Porthos is a pretty well-known project like this. Northern Lights is another option where you've got a large storage site that's opening and then able to take the CO2 from other sources across Europe. But there's also potential to do this in Southern Europe and also in onshore, where it's significantly cheaper than doing offshore storage, by the way. And so if we look at the Picasso project, I mean, this is a really exciting project where they're looking at transporting and storing CO2, working cross-border between emitting industries in Spain to store and use the sort of disused gas network and gas storage facilities in southern France, and then also developing a port facility where you could import CO2 from other member states in Europe. So by enhancing the sort of shared infrastructure, you get a lot of different companies involved in it. It helps to de-risk these things financially. Now, you need to figure out how the cross-chain risks kind of work, and that's where member states will need to come in, which I'll talk about in a sec. Another example is this smaller project or sort of earlier stage project in Spain, not too far from here in Murcia, and they're looking at how they can transport and store CO2 from various different emission sources from industrial facilities in southern Spain, and also importing it from an import terminal not too far away. So what can member states do in this? Because when I work in Brussels and I'm sort of walking around, and some member states really have their act together, right? Denmark, the Netherlands, they're kind of much further ahead on this. If I'm a member state policymaker, or if I'm someone trying to lobby my member state policymakers in terms of what they should be doing, well, first, we talked a lot about strategies and plans. I think that's very much something that I would emphasize is really key. Start looking at where you can store CO2 in your member state, if you can. And it's one thing as well to, we can store CO2 on large basins, but really getting down to sort of proper individual sites. You could look at an entire geological basin can stretch across thousands of kilometers, but really you need to get better estimates and data points in terms of how much CO2 can really be stored at specific sites. Enhancing cooperation with member states. If we're looking at the Picasso project, for example, that's a cross-border project. If you are unable to store all of the CO2 in your own country, or if you're operating on a border region, makes much more sense to sign up bilateral agreements with other member states, memorandums of understanding, for example, funding mechanisms. Again, all of this infrastructure for climate is going to cost a lot of money. Now, the good news about carbon capture and storage is that it's actually quite cost effective in terms of the cost per ton amounts. It's really competitive, and we've seen this in sort of open, sort of technology open platforms like the SG++ mechanism in the Netherlands. And so working with the EU ETS price, right? So if emitters are having to pay per ton amount over their cap, you can enhance with the ETS price, you can enhance it with a contract for difference scheme. This has been quite popular in the Netherlands. It's also being developed in Germany. There's easy ways for member states to sort of work in together and try and copy the homework, let's say, that's being done in other member states. And really starting with first mover projects, right? We've got a target now for 50 million tons per year in the Net Zero Industry Act in Europe. That's quite ambitious by 2030, considering that we don't have anything operating right now. But it's also 1/10 of what we need by 2050. So we need to ramp things up very quickly. The best way to do is through learning. And I think trying to start out with projects like these and other projects of their kind in other member states in parts of Europe is very good. So yeah, thank you very much. I hope this gave a bit of insights, and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Evert. And before I introduce the next speaker, could we show quickly the QR code for Slido so that I'm not sure if it has been shown before, but we are taking questions there. So make sure you start typing in your questions already. Okay, I see phones going up. That's a good sign. So the last speaker is Stijn Santen from EBN, and he'll be elaborating on the role of collaboration and knowledge amongst projects. We are slightly behind time, so let's try to keep it to 5 minutes. Then I think I'll have one question to all of you, and then we'll already take questions from the audience. So Stijn, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation. Fantastic to be here in Malaga. And when you walk around, it's almost natural to think that solar PV is the main contributor to CO2 reduction in this sunny area. What I would like to tell you in the coming time is to focus on the strategic element of CCS and on how we accelerate the deployment of CCS in Europe. So, if we go to the next slide. So, as already been said before by my colleagues here in the panel, it's a timely matter for decarbonization because of the very large scale of the projects, and it's also cost effective. And what is also important is that by deploying CCS in industry clusters, you can make use of residual heat of other plants for the capture units. In the case of making green hydrogen, you can use the oxygen from the electrolyzers to use in oxy-fuel carbon capture installations. So there are a lot of synergies which you can use to improve the economy of scale of industrial clusters as a whole. So I would like to advocate to see CCS not only as a back-end decarbonization tool, but also as a way to improve the economy of scale of industry as a whole in the industrial clusters. So that's one element. The other element is that yesterday there has been a lot of talks about the geopolitical situation in Europe with respect to the Critical Materials Act, the Net Zero Industry Act. And the nice thing of CCS is that by developing the projects, you are not dependent to a large extent on the critical materials. So in that sense, it's much less vulnerable to scaling up with respect to the import of critical materials. Last but not least, CCS is often very much associated with fossil fuels, with the use of abatement. This is an abatement tool for fossil energy, fossil fuels. Well, that is the history, but not necessarily the future. because we can also apply CCS to biogenic energy and biogenic feedstocks. For instance, in the Netherlands, we have a plant who makes methane, biogas, out of wastewater. And that is a very energy efficient solutions. But then you produce also, together with the methane, the CO2, which you need to remove. So here you've got the possibility to produce biogenic feedstock, biogenic energy, and remove the CO2 at the same time. When you look at Europe as a whole, 70% of the waste, both household waste and industrial waste, is dumped as landfill. So if you convert that to energy, being it low temperature heat for household, steam for industries, and power, base load power, much needed, then there is a tremendous potential. And here is also the strong synergy with oxyfuel, as I highlighted before. So these are the strategic elements, and what we're now doing is the new activity, which Eva Tam has already mentioned, is the projects network, is a new activity in the zero emission platform, whereby we bring together project developers of CCS projects in the whole of Europe to share learnings, establish best practices, and that will lead to a large improvement. So I would like to show that in the next slide. So what we aim to do is to organize 2-day events, and we will start with the Portos projects in the Netherlands. The date has not yet been fixed, but it will be in January next year. And all the various elements which will play a role in the item of developing projects. So it's various disciplines like the project management, the permitting, the operations, the policy aspect, stakeholder management. We all will address them by people who've got hands-on experience in working on these topics on the projects. And by doing so, we will come up with recommendations both for policymakers in order to streamline policies or to slightly adapt policies, but also recommendations for the project developers. And if you speak to the, we will do this in an organized fashion. So for instance, in the Zero Emission Platform, we have the government group, where currently 23 government representatives of the different countries in the European Union convene. The next meeting will be in Berlin, half November, and then we will share those recommendations to them, which they then can implement in policy. So to give you an example, if you want to transport CO2 from one country to another, so for instance it's captured in Belgium and it's stored in the Netherlands offshore, then you need to have a political agreement. So what we're now trying to do is to make this a formal procedure where basically a company in country A and country B can sign it, and then it's ready. So that's a way to reduce the project lead time. And if you talk to the experts, there is a general consensus that we can speed up the project with about 1 year by streamlining permitting processes, stakeholder engagement, etc. So in the Netherlands, for instance, we've got what we call the RCR, whereby at the national government level, all the necessary permits at the different government levels are coordinated centrally, and that gives a large savings in time. Also, when you look to project management methodologies, you can reduce your capex and opex with about 10%, and often these projects are nearly 1 billion euros, so very significant, by employing best practices and do a proper planning and execution of the project. So basically, the more you prepare in the beginning of the project, the less you have to spend and repair later on in the execution phase. And that means basically mitigating and avoiding major risk. There have been several sessions in this conference on financing and the risk perception for investors. And basically, if we are able to manage the big risk in the project, and the big risk can be associated to the characterization of the store. Will it leak? Is it safe? The flow assurance. If we're able to mitigate those risks and speed up the time, then also the risk perception for investors and banks is much lower. And we see also much more interest now from commercial banks in either project financing and infrastructure financing. So we really have got a momentum, as already explained. We have now got 70 projects ongoing in the EU, where a few years ago that was just a few. So we have an exponential growth phase and a large potential for cost reduction. So I would like to conclude my talk here with an invitation to you. If you're working on a CCS project, you're willing to join us. And if you are a policymaker and want to know more about what we are going to aspire in terms of changing the policy, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stijn. So we have 13 minutes left. We need to change the gear. We need to start moving a lot faster with the questions and with the answers. And what my plan is now for the rest of the session, to make the most of this time, I'm only from my side going to ask one question here, and I'm gonna, it can be tackled from different perspectives, and I'm gonna ask for each of you to, in a concise way, to bring in one angle of this. So not using more than a minute to deliver your message. Meanwhile, let's bring up again the QR code, so that if there are some questions that didn't yet send in, we'll see those. So the question I have for you is, what do industrial companies who want to use CCS, they want to decarbonize via using carbon capture and storage, what do they need in addition to the current policies and funding in order to be successful? And I will start with Aniceto, because I think you will be mentioning the skills, for example.
Okay. Then in relation with the skills, you say, well, the skills mean we are going to change our productions. Our way of production will change absolutely. For the time being, we have a very short experience, but we know that to introduce CCUS technologies inside a cement plant will represent an increase of around 30 to 40% employees in the plant. It means that, and this kind of new jobs will be very, high technical skills. We need people with, for sure, knowledge of environmental aspect. A lot of technical is in relation with CCUS, energy, and also transport. Then it means that probably the image of our plan in 15 years or 20 will change absolutely. Mm-hmm. We need to move deeper in the scheme we need. What kind of, but this is something, yesterday we have an event in Brussels, exactly related with the new skill that the cement sector will need, not only for CCUS, but for other technologies, and we will suffer a tremendous transformation.
Great. Who wants to come in next? Golorem, please.
I'll just say that we also need the finance sector to come to the table. Of the existing 37 projects globally, at the moment, maybe one or two of them have had any bank financing applied. There have been on company balance sheets and government grants, which are of course important. We'll have government grants. But we need investable business cases, which we're getting in Europe. CCFDs, for example, help with that. But we need the banks to come or the venture capital to come, and because that scaling up is not just going to happen on company balance sheets. So, finance sector.
Great. Evert?
I'll go. Well, we need the oil and gas industry to step up. Quite frankly, they're the ones with all the money, all the resources, the people, the infrastructure, and they've been talking about CCS for God knows how long, and they've done basically nothing to make it happen. So right now in Brussels, we've got an obligation on the table that would oblige all oil and gas producers in the EU, which is not that much, to basically store an amount or contribute to the 2030 target based on their production. It's going not so great in the European Council discussions, because there's some member states who are quite reticent about this. Generally, the industry has actually been quite reasonable in saying, like, yes, we can do it. But I think that really we need to start thinking real about the oil and gas sector, and how it's going to step up.
Okay, and Stein, over
Yeah,
to you.
what I see is that everybody is working quite hard on the project, so I don't see a lack of dedication and skills in the industries and in the value chain. What I do see is a strong need for capacity building in governments and regulators who need to judge the permits and who need to appraise it, and there it's often very difficult because of capacity reasons to find the appropriate person. So I think that is something which would require a strong improvement. And I think with respect to financing in the Netherlands, we have not seen a request for financing, but that can be in other jurisdictions different.
Yeah, indeed. So let's take a question from Slido. We have one dedicated specifically to Evert. So can you give numbers? I don't know if you have them on top of your head, but CCS and cost competitiveness today for clinker.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Okay, so the long answer is yes, I can get you proper numbers, whoever that person will be. The short answer is there's a very good paper that came out at the beginning of this year, because I would contest the question first in terms of, is it cost competitive for clinker, right? Who here knows what the price of clinker is? I don't know what the price of clinker is. Do I really care? No. I care what is cement used for. It's used to build things like bridges. So there's a great paper that came out at the beginning of the year by Sintef, and it basically looked at the cost of a bridge. How much could we decarbonize it, the steel and cement, how much would that add to the cost of the bridge? So with CCS used to produce cement, then used to produce this bridge, and with steel, would cost about 50% extra in terms of producing the cement, but to the cost of the bridge, 1%. So it's not actually that expensive. And the question is as well, I think, when it looks to cement, is there is no other option. You can't renewable or green hydrogen your way to zero emission cement because 60% of the emissions are process emissions, right? It's in the limestone. There's no other way that you can actually produce this thing at scale without doing CCS. So what's the cost relative to? Just letting the CO2 being dumped in the atmosphere and letting climate change roll on? So I think that the cost thing also really depends on where the site is situated, etc. And the second question, I don't want to be too antagonistic here, but I don't think cement is priority sector number one for CCS. I mean, it's the sector with no other alternatives. But if you look at like fertilizers, you've got basically a pure stream of CO2 that's coming out, and it's being let to vent into the atmosphere that could just be captured for, you know, a couple of euros a ton. I mean, it's absolutely insane that we're not capturing the CO2 and putting it in the ground. So I think there are plenty other sectors that are priority sector number, but I wouldn't even like to rank them because I like to think of they're all emitting into the atmosphere, and we really need to try and stop that from happening. And CCS is a good way to tackle a lot of those sectors.
Thanks. Would anyone want to add to this on the CCS and cement side? Nothing more? Yeah, Aniceto? No?
Well, no, in relation with the cost, how competitive the clinker. We are the first stage of the process, then
yes.
It's not clear at all what will be the final price to produce, but in principle you have, foreseen that the price will be much higher than today.
Yeah.
But as all the comments is in relation with construction cost, it's not so relevant. Yeah? As a product could be tremendous relevant, but in the point of view of the construction sector, it's not so important.
Let's see if we have also a question in the room. There is a hand here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I work.
Can you introduce yourself first?
Yes, I'm Francisco Rodriguez from Banco Sabadell. So, as the financial sector has been stated, well, I mean, if I can talk about the financial sector, actually, I think we're doing a really good job helping the reduction of emissions, and well, we've been really helping all the renewables, and as you know, in Spain we're very punchy there. So I am sure that when those...
Do you have a question? Because we
yes,
are...
Yes, no, I'm sure that when those projects come, we will be able to help. And the question was for asking for the project in Murcia. What are the financial sources? Who is financing and who is putting this project in force? Because well, it's quite interesting project, but
I don't know.
I don't know if you have any information about that.
I mean, the short answer is it's very difficult to get private funding for these projects, right? There's basically no business case to do it right now because industries are given free allowances, so they're not even paying the ETS price, and they won't be paying them fully for about 10 years.
Okay.
So the government needs to come in, make these things happen, and the financial sector needs to also be ready to take those projects on when there's a business case.
Of course. And the second question, if I may, is why we've seen this map, and in the south of Europe there's not so many projects. Why could that be the case? Why is this happening? If you can, if there's any reason, specific reason why in the south of Europe there's not so many projects?
Why the south of Europe doesn't have that many projects? Is that your question?
You've commented a little bit on it, but I'm not sure.
I think Stein wants to comment
I think
on
that
this.
is basically the history of oil and gas production in northwestern Europe, whereby the geology of the reservoirs is very well known, very well characterized, and where you have the experience. So it's got nothing to do with north and south, but just where are the presence of the reservoirs.
Great. So I'll take one last question, actually from here, from Slido, because I think that's perfect for Gulor and also hear from her. It's about the very first one here on the list. How does Europe, with focus on CCUS strategy and projects, compare competitively with the US, China, and others? Because you work globally, the Institute works globally, so you have great insights there.
So the US has been historically a leader in CCS. I mentioned the first project started there, and it continues to be a leader in terms of project development. US has got more than a dozen facilities in operation and around 100 actually facilities in development. Immense policy support for carbon management in the US, bipartisan infrastructure law, $12 billion allocated to CCS and CDR projects. Then you will have heard the IRA with the 45Q tax credit, and what's great about the tax credit, it's for 12 years, gives visibility to the financiers, it makes the business case kind of financeable in the US. So we're seeing a lot of momentum in the US, and arguably the Net Zero Industry Act is been a bit of a response to that US sort of leadership in the carbon management space. When we look at China, it's in the 5-year, CCS is in the 5-year strategy. China does not have a comprehensive policy or regulatory framework, but what's interesting is, of course, China's got state-owned enterprises which are able to invest and move rather quickly in CCS. So China had its first million-ton large-scale project in chemicals come into operation last year. They, again, earlier this summer, they had their first CCS retrofit on a coal-fired power plant. We know that China has got a lot of new coal-fired power plants, and they're all kind of similar technologies, so it can be replicable. They had their first pipeline start operations. In fact, the capture facility was completed before the pipeline. They could move so quickly. So I'm quite hopeful that things could move quite quickly in China. And of course, it's going to be interesting to sort of see what this means for the technology and its competitiveness globally.
I would like to add to that.
Okay.
I think definitely the United States was the leader, but I think Europe will be the leader in CCS. If you look in the change of momentum in the last year, also Germany and Austria and other countries deploying CCS, we're establishing the best practices. We're invited by DOE in the United States to explain how we're doing things in the Netherlands and in Europe as a whole. I don't see an equivalent of projects like Aramis in the United States. And I think it's the collaborative nature of working in Europe, which is quite different from that in the US, which will be a major success differentiator in Europe.
Great. I mean, this is a great final remark for the panel discussion part. I will now finish up with some final conclusions from my side. So we obviously heard that this is not a new technology. It has been around for a long time, but there is so much momentum now in Europe on the policy landscape. Member states are changing their stance on this. Those who didn't maybe look at it in the past are looking at it now, or those who were negative in the past are looking at it now. It's not only about offshore storage, it's also about onshore storage. Carbon border adjustment mechanism is an important element in the discussions on CCS. From a member state side, we need national strategies, we need storage atlases, we need to know where it's possible to store. We need good collaboration between the member states to make all of this happen. We obviously need the funding that came up a lot in our discussions. The project network that we are launching at Zero Emissions Platform in itself also has a great potential impact on building the projects up in Europe through reduction in project lead time, reduction in project cost, mitigating, avoiding risk. So Europe indeed has a chance to very strongly push forward on this front. So I'd say positive messages to take home from this session. I don't want to keep you from the lunch because I know that that's the next part. Thank you to everyone also who tuned in online and sent in the questions. And let's finish up with a big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.